Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the H.C. Wainwright Bioconnect 2022 conference. My name is Michael Brotherton. I'm on the corporate access team at H.C. Wainwright. Where we are virtual this year, we're confident we're going to be able to provide value to you with over 550 companies presenting at this conference, as well as via interactions to one-on-one meetings. H.C. Wainwright is a full-service investment bank dedicated to providing corporate finance, strategic advisory, and related services to public and private companies across multiple sectors and regions. We have a total of 23 publishing senior analysts and over 630 companies covered across all sectors. Please visit hcwco.com for more information. From a logistics standpoint, please make sure to reference your Bioconnect virtual conference online portal that provides your individual links to your meetings and all presentations. Please join us for corporate presentations and panels that are available live and streaming on January 10th through 13th. With that said, have a productive and enjoyable day. And I'd like to introduce our next presenter. I'd like to welcome Mark Emelfarb, CEO of Dyadic International, a company that has the technology to transform the biomanufacturing process of vaccines and drugs for a global population.
Thank you, Michael. And welcome, everybody. 2022 is going to be a revolutionary year for Dyadic and our C1 protein platform as we head into our first phase 1 human clinical trial, addressing today's vaccine and therapeutic shortfalls through the science of tomorrow. Slide 2 is our safe harbor statement. Our mission is to transform biomanufacturing. We've already improved how we feed and fuel the world, and now we're working on how we're going to heal the world in a more consistent basis on a global population, ultimately fulfilling the unmet need of affordable biologic drugs, vaccines, and biologic products and processes. On slide 4, you can see that we have a very strong balance sheet, no debt, no warrants, large insider ownership, and 28.1 million shares as of 11/9/2021. We're re-engineering the cell line that we developed over 2.5 decades to develop and produce versatile platform, strong competitive advantage, strong IP, large addressable markets, global strategic partnerships, including the one we recently, and we'll talk about later, with Janssen Biotech, which is J&J, an experienced leadership team, not only as a management team, but the board of directors and consultants on a global basis. You can see as a management team, we have a great track record of success coming from big pharma, small biotech, industrial biotech, pharmaceuticals, including Pfizer, Merck, Phoenix, Codexis, Novartis. We've developed this incredibly strong management team that's very focused on driving the cost down, increasing the quantities of making healthcare accessible on a global basis. The history of the C1 technology platform is very deep and very long. We spent 25 years in industrial biotech perfecting how to make massive volumes of large quantities of low-cost proteins at very large scale. We sold the industrial biotech business to DuPont on 12/31/2015 for $75 million, where we then subsequently repurchased on a share buyback program of $22 million. That was after licensing the technology in the industrial side to Shell Oil, Abengoa Bioenergy, BASF, and others. Over the last 5 years, we kept the rights to use the C1 cell line, to redesign it, re-engineer it, retool it to produce human therapeutic proteins. For 2022 strategic objectives, COVID, human health, nutrition, animal health. With COVID, the goal here is to demonstrate human safety and preliminary efficacy in our first phase 1 human clinical trial of our DYA100 SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 vaccine. To expand the portfolio against SARS-CoV-2 variants of concern through global partnerships, to develop monoclonal antibodies in collaboration with EU scientists and others. On the human health side, as I mentioned, just recently we announced the execution of Janssen as a Janssen Biotech, and we also received a Nimble grant, and we'll go through the details of that further on coming up in the presentation. We're collaborating on infectious disease, vaccine, and antibody candidates in addition to COVID-19. We're advancing monoclonal antibodies with registrational potential in oncology, neurodegenerative, and other diseases with top-tier pharma and biotech and academia. And we're working on modifying the C1 cell line to develop glyco-engineered cells to produce antibodies with human-like characteristics. On the animal health side of the business, we're advancing commercial recombinant antigen vaccine candidates, one, for example, in poultry animal trials with a global animal health company. We're expanding our pipeline and developing C1 Express biologic products for farm animals and companion animals. And of course, we're addressing the zoonotic disease opportunities, infectious disease from animals to human, including evaluating salmonella, zoonotic influenza, West Nile virus, coronavirus, which we're working on now, and a variety of other infectious disease. On the nutrition side, we've actually leveraged the technology to work on primary and secondary metabolites. As you can see here, we have a production of cannabinoids in filamentous fungi, a PCT patent application that we've just identified here on the slide. We're exploring partnerships within the nutraceutical market and the food protein market opportunities. Let's talk about our advance towards the first phase 1 human clinical trial. And again, this is to prove safety and efficacy of proteins, all proteins produced from C1, to demonstrate that the platform is not an issue of producing safe protein. In this particular case, we're using the COVID-19 pandemic to advance the DYA100 recombinant protein vaccine candidate in a human trial. We developed this candidate in conjunction with the Israeli government and the European Union. 3 of the top 20 coronavirus scientists in the world worked with us in the ZAPI program, from Erasmus Medical Center, Utrecht University, etc. Partnering with us and consulting with us is Parexel, one of the world's largest regulatory and CMC consultants. Covance's subsidiary in Vigo in Israel carried out our toxicology study, which was a success. Biotechnology General in Israel is who we've been working with on our cGMP manufacturing, their division of Pharmaceutical, and now we're working on putting the drug substance into a drug product in vials, which we hope to have very soon. Once it's in fill finish is concluded, we can then file for regulatory acceptance to move forward into what we expect is a phase 1 human clinical trial in the first half of 2022. We're establishing global presence with leading organizations, co-developing C1-enabled COVID-19 vaccines and our boosters, antibodies, and other therapeutics for several diseases, as mentioned earlier. Janssen Pharmaceuticals, most recent announcement, research license and collaboration agreement with Janssen. Let me go through some of the terms and explain the details of what we're doing there. In that particular program, we're working on 2 different proteins, one being a monoclonal antibody, identified by Janssen as commercial opportunities. They're paying us $500,000 up front and up to 1.6 million euros in research and development funding to develop and assess Janssen product candidates. They also have an option payment of a mid-7 figure for an exclusive license to one specific target. They have a very limited number of targets in general. They have an option payment to pay another mid-7 figure for additional non-exclusive targets to expand additional target opportunities on a non-exclusive basis. Potential for development and regulatory milestones in the mid-7 figures per product. Potential for addition 7-figure payment. Potential for commercial milestones in the low 9 figures per product based on cumulative amount of a pharmaceutical product produced. When we say low 9 figures, you're talking about the potential between 100 million and $200 or $300 million. When we talk about mid-7 figures, we're talking about numbers between $3 and $7 million. You can look at this as an enormous opportunity to work with one of the top tier pharmaceutical companies to speed the adoption and use of not only the technology for Janssen, but broadly for the industry on a global basis. Syngene, you may or may not be familiar with. Syngene is one of the top 10 CDMOs. You probably know the names of Lonza, you know the names of Catalent, you know the names of Patheon. Syngene is talked about in the same breath as them and companies like WuXi. They are working with us now on a COVID-19 program and evaluating the C1 technology potentially for monoclonal antibodies and other therapeutics. Rubik in South Africa is a consortium of universities and industry leaders in South Africa with the goal and objective is to take the C1 technology and use it to build an infrastructure of a vaccine manufacturing facility in South Africa to produce vaccines for the African continent. You may not realize this, not only are they lowly vaccinated, only 1% of the vaccines that are used in Africa are produced in Africa. And we're working on changing that story so that they can produce the vaccines for themselves in larger quantities and lower cost. In Sorrento, we announced back in August, and we're still sorting through discussions with them on whether and if we'll be able to put a deal together with them to advance the technology for coronavirus. Development pipeline, I'm not going to go walking through all of this. Nimble, we just received a grant for up to $690,000 to develop a coronavirus antibody and another antibody. As I mentioned with Syngene, we're already working on variant vaccine candidates, potential boosters in a co-development program. We talked about Rubik. In Europe, we're working on a monoclonal antibody that has the potential to be used for Omicron. And then there's a small Indian biotech company that we're working on co-development, and see footnote 2 there for details, called Epigen. On the human side, non-COVID, we talked about Janssen. Kangaroo is a Chinese, one of the largest Chinese, if not the largest market cap Chinese company. We're working on biologic drugs there. Turtle Tree, Top Pharma with the bispecific antibodies. The University of Oslo on an influenza program. That's an internal program. And then other collaborations on antigens and monoclonal antibodies. On the animal health side, again, we're working with animal health companies, some of the largest, but in particular, we have the poultry trial that's now been in 2 or 3 different animal studies. It's looking very promising. So we hope to get into a license agreement with that global animal health company and announce that sometime within the first half of this year. Again, it's a platform technology, so don't get caught up with a COVID-19 vaccine, a monoclonal antibody, a therapeutic protein. It's take a gene, put it in, out comes a protein. You can see whether that's for vaccines, biosimilars, biopharmaceuticals, animal health, biotherapeutic manufacturing, et cetera. We have the keys to make large volumes of low-cost proteins that we think can outproduce and outperform other vaccine and antibody and therapeutic protein manufacturing processes on a global basis. The markets are huge. Of course, you know, recombinant subunit vaccines and therapeutic proteins for animal health is at 11.3 billion by 2025. New biologics, 319 billion by 2021. Recombinant glycoproteins and other antigen vaccines targeting 58.4 billion by 2024. Biosimilars, vaccines and therapeutics for environmental pandemics and other biological threats. I think you can see here, if we just had a fraction of any of these businesses, we could have a very successful business and make a dramatic impact on human health on a global basis. Again, just to review, we have the potential to disrupt conventional manufacturing platforms by overcoming production limitations. Purity, productivity, robustness, speed, cost, all those advantages are there in the C1 cell line. We've demonstrated it for 20 years on the industrial side, and we're starting to demonstrate it now on the human therapeutic and animal health side. We have a track record of over 20 years of developing the platform. It's commercially proven, produce large cost quantities of proteins. We're poised to transform healthcare using the C1 cells. The genetic toolkit is defined. We have a great toolkit. It's getting better, quicker, faster, cheaper. It's ready to deploy, and we are already deploying it in the antigen space for vaccines and for animal and human health. Generally recognized as safe, GRAS certification. As I mentioned earlier, we had a very successful toxicology study. It was done by Covance's subsidiary in Israel, in Vigo, and we're advancing towards our first in-human clinical trial in the first half of 2022. So there's no commercial retooling needed. C1 has grown in regulatory-friendly, low-cost, competitively, completely defined synthetic media using standard microbial bioreactors. We don't need fancy equipment, fancy media. We have all the resources to quickly tech transfer this all over the globe to be able to use it to develop locally the genes, turn them into proteins, whether they be vaccines or antigens or other therapeutic proteins. Our infectious disease strategy for animal and human health is to develop multivalent recombinant variant antigens for SARS-CoV-2, influenza, and other infectious diseases, as we talked about earlier. We've already developed 5 variant of concern SARS-CoV-2 antigens. We have the Wuhan, we have the Alpha, the Beta, the Gamma, the Delta, and we're now working on Omicron. We're working with the University of Oslo. They've done a hemagglutinin mice trial that supports the previous hemagglutinin mice trial that was very successful by Sanofi. And we're looking forward to using C1 to produce influenza vaccine. There's a potential to actually combine an influenza vaccine with a SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. And you can see here, once we have the gene synthesized, we can produce a stable cell line within 60 days. Protein production, biologic, this slide here on 17 just gives you an example of some of the hyperproductivity, the record productivity levels of the different antigens, therapeutic proteins of different classes and different types. If you look at the coronavirus antigen SRBD product, we've been able to produce between 2,000 and 3,000 milligrams per liter in 120 hours. Other companies using insect cells like Novavax and Sanofi, those technologies are going to be lucky to produce 50 milligrams per liter in 8 days. So we can do it faster at significantly higher levels at lower cost without the need to remove viruses, because we don't have endotoxins like E. coli to get rid of, and we don't have viruses to get rid of like the baculovirus or the CHO cells. On the human biopharmaceutical protein, our model protein for the monoclonal antibody program, which is what we're doing to genetically modify C1 cells to develop monoclonal antibodies that can be produced quicker, 3 or 4 batches. And at the same time, you can produce 1 batch of a CHO cell antibody using much lower cost food or media and microbial fermenters at a much lower cost, potentially at a higher yield. We're aiming here at right now Nivolumab, which is a biosimilar, biobetter version of Opdivo, which is Bristol Myers Squibb's $8 billion oncology drug. If we can make a monoclonal antibody with Opdivo that is at the right quality, the right quantity, then we can make multiple other monoclonal antibodies. This is a demonstration, but also potential pipeline product that can be out licensed by us or partnered out. Business development strategy, we have a co-development technology licensing strategy, which allows Dyadic to develop and advance our recombinant protein technology at low cost to the company. The self-funded projects we work on the right, internal Dyadic product development, is Dyadic funds certain things like the COVID-19 vaccine product to go into phase 1. And again, that's for safety and efficacy of proteins produced from C1 with an extra benefit of taking COVID-19 into potentially a phase 2 and phase 3 funded by others. The glycoengineering of the Nivolumab, again, is a proof of concept for production of MABs. And we continue on working on different variants of concern, influenza, infectious disease. And our model is on big pharma on the left to get funded proof of concept collaborations like we did with J&J or Janssen, which is what we've done over the last several years, where we're getting upfront cash for R&D, which totally covers fully funded research and development that leads to potential milestones, royalties, and other payments that can be quite substantial, as you see there in the Janssen Biotech deal. Small, medium biotechs, potential for equity, milestones. Other platforms that have been developed over the years have sold for $400 million to Merck, which was the Glycophi, and we can do much broader applications, much larger production, many more uses of our technology than yeast with the Filamentous fungi of the C1 technology. J&J paid $2.4 billion for Crucell. Ligand paid $516 million to buy Phoenix, which was a very limited. They can only make non-glycoproteins. And then Sanofi paid $750 million, amazingly, for the baculovirus system that we've demonstrated in the ZAPI program. We can produce several hundred times larger quantities in a short amount of time without the need to remove viruses. So the key takeaway here is it's proprietary, patented C1 gene expression technology designed to bring biologic vaccines and drugs to market faster, in greater volumes at lower cost for global population. Compared with other pharmaceutical systems, we believe it's more robust, more versatile, and the data is growing on an exponential basis to speed adoption and use of this technology platform all over the world. Emphasis on large and growing addressable human and animal health markets with many shots on goal. 22 million in cash and investment securities, no debt, and complemented by partner-funded ongoing R&D collaboration. Our experienced management and board of directors is driving process and execution excellence. And I want to thank you for joining today's presentation and look forward to your questions.